Welcome to the Code of Traditional Archery, brought to you by Primitive Stone Archery and the founder, Grant Richardson.
Welcome to the Code of Traditional Archery podcast. I'm Grant Richardson, your host. Welcome to all the new people joining us, and a big thank you to those who've been supporting us thus far. The Code of Traditional Archery is dedicated to the legacy and heritage of traditional bow hunting and the process of the ethical predator, the silent art of hunting the hard way. Our original intent of this podcast was to bring back traditional archery and bow hunting to an older era where hunting ability met archer, and together the two formed a bow hunter. Shooting and hunting with recurves and longbows is more popular than ever. However, the approach is much more so an art and skill set, not a product, but a process. We welcome Sean Bleakley, lifetime traditional bowhunter and longtime member of the Professional Bowhunter Society. Welcome to this grassroots edition, episode 27 of the Code of Traditional Archery.
I want to welcome Sean Bleakley. Did I pronounce that right, Sean?
Bleakley, long A.
Bleakley. There we go. We had that. I think somebody may pronounce your name wrong the other day. I heard on the
probably
social media too. Bleakley. That's
BLEA.
Tracking that. Perfect. I want to welcome you to the Code of Traditional Archery grassroots edition of the podcast. We're kind of switching gears a little bit, and we talk about, the three pillars I wrote about in my book, which is the weapons proficiency with a stick bow, what that means to you, and any lessons learned, and that carries on through, ethics to guide us on that journey of hunting, and then conservation and stewardship as well. But please take the time to introduce yourself, and thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
I'm Sean Bleakley, from New York, the Hudson Valley area. I've been involved in archery for about probably 46 or so years. Started out with a compound, and for about probably less than 10 years, and then went to a recurve, and I shot a recurve ever since. And that's kind of taken me to a lot of places that I never thought I'd be. And, doing podcasts and things like that, if I can get more people interested in it or whatever, that's my main goal.
Yeah, I think that's important today. Like it's funny. I said to someone last week that was asking me about it, and they'd come up empty at their rifle camp for the whole week, their gun camp here. And he said to me, how do you have the patience to do that? And I said, well, it's kind of a little bit less of a hunting method, a little bit more of a lifestyle. Because if you don't kind of embrace it that way, you're going to get pretty disappointed pretty quickly.
Exactly.
That lifestyle thing.
Oh yeah. Lifestyle. And that's what it is. It's, I've hunted, all over North America, Canada. I did 2 weeks in South Africa this summer, and it's, a lot of those trips I came up, empty handed, and
right.
And I'm okay with that. It's, it's like you hear, I guess, like Mike Mitten talk about it. It's about the journey. It's not the destination. It's how you do it, the way you do it. Jay Massey.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
He didn't have he was a good hunter, but because of the self limitations that, he set on himself,
yeah,
he, it was, he didn't end up, taking a lot of game, like say maybe a Fred Bear or something like that. But
sure. Yeah, of course.
What he did take was quality.
That's right. Yep. I remember the first time I actually got really close to a buck that was bedded down. And of course there was two does on the other side of the cedar fence. I didn't know were there either. And they were all over me, and they let him know I was there. And he didn't know exactly where I was, but he ran by me. He was so close. He was within 8 feet of me when he took off by me. I think I was 17 or 18. I remember thinking, oh my God, that was an incredible, it didn't even matter. I didn't get a shot. I remember sitting down on this, I had to take kind of a breath for a minute because he almost ran me over. I remember thinking, wow, how did I do that? And then, years later came to the you know, revelation when I was telling that story to somebody. I realized I tried it about 24 times before and never it had failed. I hadn't gotten it,
Yeah.
that I'd failed through that whole, attempt. I mean, it takes a little bit of resilience to be a stick bow hunter,
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely, it's a mentality that not everybody has. And I think about this a lot, being involved in, Compton's and PBS,
Mm-hmm.
and the people where most of my friends that I have, now that I really are from, or, belong to both of these organizations.
Sure.
And I think we all have that. We have a lot of things in common that, a lot of personality traits and things like that.
Right.
And, I don't want to say it's like we're better people, but I tell you what, the friends that I've made in being involved in traditional archery are some of the best people I've ever come across in any of my trips or anything I've ever done. I mean, it's some really, really, really great people that I've met through traditional archery.
Yeah, it's funny. I've talked to so many people in the last couple of years, and I just absolutely love hearing people's experiences, even if they're not my experiences. They're so relatable. Everything is so relatable, and I find that really fascinating. And I talk about, the first discussion we talk about is that weapons proficiency with a stick bow, and I had someone recently ask me, "Oh, you must be one of these shot pros." I'm like, "Oh my God, no!" Like, I mean, I tried that with one of the prior Damon Howard owners when Martin still owned them, and they sent me 2 bows. And I've said this before, I shot for them a whole summer, did really well. And then at the end of it was, well, we don't have a big market in Canada. Stick bows aren't really what we're really going to focus on. So just send the bows back unless you want to buy them. I'm like, not with that attached to it, I'm not, because I still had 7 Howitts at that time sitting there. I guess my point is that, like, wow, like, no, I'm not. But in order to maintain that effectiveness, I don't know about you, but personally, me, and I'd love to hear your input on this, especially since we're kind of similar in that way. I've got a big mojo thing with Damon Howitt. You have the same thing with Black Widow. Because something about that bow design and the company and all of that rest of it kind of fits your own spiritual makeup with that bow in your hand.
Yeah, it
works for you, right?
So I love to hear.
Right, I love to hear your lessons learned about what happened when you first picked up a Black Widow and you're shooting and your experiences with that in the woods.
Well, my whole thing with Black Widow came about actually after watching. I don't know if you're familiar with it was the video "White Till Eye to Eye." Alan Alkaiser.
Yeah.
And I told Alan that, I said, "You're the reason why I shoot a Black Widow is just because of that." And
right.
I was like, "I got." And I had been shooting. I had a couple old bears I was shooting before that, and I had a Hoyt takedown recurve that was the first. And I had a couple Asbels before that.
Yeah.
And so I said, "Well, I want to get me one." So I ordered from Ken Beck, and they sent the TNT video with it.
Yeah.
So I watched that and all the arrow tuning and everything like that. And then, any video I could watch. So it just, and back then I think it probably took a little over 2 months just to get, I believe, maybe 2.5 months. And I ordered it late in the season. I think I got it in March of 96 when I finally had it in my hands, February, March 96. And I remember the excitement. I remember I remember just kind of feeling special that I had it,
Yeah.
And it was funny because I had a hard time shooting it. Now, the other bows that I had before that, they were set up where I was shooting off an elevated rest and I was shooting 3 under.
Gotcha.
So when I ordered this bow, I had, Ken and I, we spoke on the phone and we kind of came up with the specs with it, just, talking about what I was shooting there and everything else.
Sure.
And so I had it tillered for 3 under, and man, I just couldn't shoot that 3 under. But he also talked me into shooting off the shelf.
Right.
And he
Gotcha.
explained, how and I have a pretty good cant. I cant from probably, like a 2 to 7 cant.
Sure.
And I just, for some reason, with 3 on. So I went to split finger, and then I started putting the arrow where I wanted.
Yeah.
So it took a little bit without, because I was a little discouraged at first with it. It was kind of, it was a little scary actually,
Right.
And then I just, I shot every day, and I probably missed, I don't know, probably the first, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 deer I shot at with it. Just kind of getting, because I think before that I'd taken maybe three or 4 deer before that. And then, I kind of changed up shooting a little bit, and I was getting a little more accurate with it. And then from there on in, it was, turned out pretty good. So,
yeah. It's funny though. If you think about it, like I remember the very first deer that I shot, I just had a pretty large buck right in front of me. That was just terrible shot presentation. He walked straight in at me, and then I went around and he buggered off. And then there was this smaller buck came in right behind me. And I was so frustrated because I had the bow up for probably 10 minutes. And I'm like, oh, my heart was racing. And I'll never forget this as long as I live. It was the first time it just sort of happened without me thinking all this stuff through it. And I turned, and this little buck came about 15 yards to my left and started quartering away from me and winded me. Like he knew I was there, but he was doing that stiff, slow walk. And then he saw the bigger buck across this little meadow, about maybe 90 yards away. And he froze. And I remember just going, boom. And the arrow went straight where I was looking. Like, I'll never forget that. It was the first time where it was almost that no mind kind of thing.
Yeah.
Of placement and just shooting without any type of, that was a real big connection piece for me. I'll never forget that. I'm like, wow, that was quite incredible. It's just the deer ran 50 yards and piled up. That was nuts. Now, of course, that's the best case scenario. We don't know, it always doesn't happen that way.
Yeah. But, once I could calm myself down and pick a spot,
right,
then it and that's usually my number one advice when I tell somebody about it. It's just, you got to pick that spot, because I would fall apart, a little bit, coming from the range, shooting at a live animal, I remember, and just not picking a spot, just every shot over top. And then finally I remember just like, again, calming myself down. I got to, calm myself down, picking a spot. And then it's just amazing how, just that arrow go right where you're looking.
Yeah. It's pretty incredible. The training platform I utilize isn't so much the technical aspects of the draw and the anchor and all that. Some of that's covered. Yeah. For people that have never done anything before. But I mean, my daughter, Indy, she's 14 this year. That kid is a way better shot in her own platform of what she does with a hunting weight recurve than I was at even at 18 or 19.
Wow. Yeah.
It's crazy, like it's incredible. And she's also super discriminating. She'll she's decided not to drop the arrow a couple times, and she loves hunting off the ground. That's her thing. And
yeah.
I mean, she took feathers off the back of a tom at 25, 26 yards last year at a pretty fast walk because he saw her when she came up to shoot. And she's like, oh my God, I missed. And I walked over to her, and there was 2 of the feathers off the base of his neck lying there. And he was still taking off and chasing these 2 toms across another field. And I said, you came within a quarter of an inch of taking that bird off the ground in a completely crazy position with your bow almost completely out of wrap, a crazy can't. I said, and she goes, well, I guess he left me a couple of presents, and she picked up the feathers and kept them. But I mean, like, I think there's something to be said for more. I like to do the training aspect of shooting a little bit more than the picking at the finite points, because I find, for me anyway, and as I know with your background, you've done a whole lot of pistol shooting, carbine shooting. under pressure and adrenaline, no matter what format you put it in, you're going to default to what you've done to shoot, not what someone may have told you to correct in increments,
Yeah.
versus that,
Your muscle memory.
That's right. Right. I mean, when I was much younger, I did a camp, a week-long combat pistol training with a very well-known organization. I won't say who it was, in the States. And I was so excited to go there. The safety brief was an hour long. It was because of how many problems they'd had with people who were coming in there figuring they were, 6-gun, kind of cowboys, so to speak. And some people shot themselves. They had range scars. They shot themselves in the foot. And there were safety precautions that weren't being followed. They developed some bad habits. Anyway, I digress, but that's sort of how I see that translating into a lot of shooting. Like some people will come to me, what do I do about shooting? I'm like, well, you need to shoot more. It's just, in some cases,
that's it. And in pistol shooting, it's actually not a whole lot different.
Right.
It's like, my I have kind of a, when people ask me how I shoot, I really can't explain it. And I make a joke. I said, I said, I'm an instinctive snap gap shooter.
Right.
Okay. So I kind of do all three.
Yes.
And, but same with a pistol, I both eyes open. I, shoot both eyes open, focus on my target, and then I just let everything else happen. Just draw back and, if I get the anchor,
right.
it's usually a release right there. But I usually get the anchor pretty much. It depends because if I'm if I have too many people around or my concentration is just
Yeah.
But if I'm in the woods by myself, it's a whole lot easier for me to focus on what I'm doing. But if I'm in a 3D, say, at ETAR or something and around a bunch of guys, it's just, that's all I'm thinking about is then I'm either short drawing or plucking a string, or I just usually fall apart at the shot like that. But we don't keep score and, we joke around and stuff like that with it. But, it does kind of get a little bit of like, especially if I send a, arrow over top or, something like that. But, it does get a little humbling.
My dad was a member of a hunt camp. I was probably 10 or 11 just for a couple of years. And they used to hold those big turkey shoots with 22s, they'd have a turkey shoot.
Yep.
And he had a Brownie Explorer 2 back then. Beautiful rosewood, sapwood. And that was one of the first recurves that did it for me. I had that Doug Kittredge with a cowboy hat, a plaid shirt, and jeans in my brain. It just burned in there, and just with that bull quiver and the bow, and he just go out. That was crazy for me. And so one day we were out there and these guys were kind of there. It was starting to get a little heated about bows and arrows. And they're like, well, why don't we do our poker chip shoot with you? He said to this one guy said to my dad, Fred. So he's like, okay, yeah, no problem. And I'm thinking, holy crap, they bring this thing back to like 30 yards and the guy takes a shot with 22. And of course he takes the poker chip out, no problem. Brings back it was Brown Explorer versus a 22 Cooey, right? Yeah. So my dad gets his bow and he draws and he lets down, he draws and he pinwheels a poker chip. They go 3 for 3. And I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. And the pot was raising up to a point where they decided to quit. We got in the truck that day. We had it would have been 79 because we had a red Ford Bronco, the old ones, the massive ones.
Oh yeah. Yep.
We got in one of these things and we're going down this road and I look over at my dad and he's got this grin on his face. I go, how did you do that? And he said, well, the same guy for the last few months has been bragging to people about how good a shot he is at a poker chip at 30 yards or 20 yards or whatever it was. So he goes, I took a bunch of the old checker chips. I've been shooting at them for the last 3 months. It was like he'd practiced for that scenario ahead of time, kind of pulled the magic trick kind of thing on him, the whole reveal thing. But I remember thinking after that kind of deflated a little bit of the mystique for me as a kid. I'm like, wait, what? What do you mean you practice for that? You didn't just haul off and do it,
Yeah.
And I say it in my book. I talk about my dad's friend, Mike Watanek. Mike was a diehard ASL guy. Like if you used anything else but an ASL and his Wiki 2 blade or a Howard Hill, he liked his Howard Hills too, broadheads.
Oh yeah.
He would spit on everything else. He was completely obtuse to any other way of doing anything. And he had like a 75-pound Howard Hill Big Five original. And he got my dad one too. He had a few of them. And these were Schultz built Big Fives. They were crazy, crazy bows. Yep. And he would be a big deer hunter, but he loved snowshoe rabbit hunting. Like Sean, he was obsessed with it. And he would show up at my dad's door randomly because my dad had access to all this land around our rural area, and he was from Ottawa, the city.
Yeah.
He's like, "Come on, Freddie, we're going to go out and hunt." I'm like, "Oh my God." So we'd go out and hunt rabbits. Man, I saw that guy make shots at people. I talk about one of them. There's other ones. I saw him shoot a grouse out of the air with that thing. And people would never believe me if I wrote about it. And I wrote about one in the book about him shooting a rabbit and it was probably farther than it was, I said in the book. Like it was like pinwheeling this thing. And I remember saying to him, the first thing was I needed to shoot like that. I'm like, I have to be able to do that. And two, how does he do it? He never could explain it to me. It was just so personal. And I remember him saying, I don't know. I look at the rabbit, I aim down the arrow, and the arrow goes where I'm looking. Just let's keep going. He's like, well, we're wasting time here. I think it was Polish, Czechoslovakian guys, a man of few words. And he was just like, I saw that guy do some things with that Big Five that people would think I'm just full of it. It was crazy for me. So I don't talk about a lot of them. Like, anyway.
Yeah. No, it's definitely something, especially, I've done quite a bit of rabbit hunting and hitting them on the run. And that's, and with that, we do a lot. We used to hunt up toward Albany. We'd meet up every last weekend of our rabbit season. We get a bunch of guys going and, we usually do pretty good. And it's probably one of the best rabbit places I've seen. These are cottontails. Any snowshoes up. But with that, it's just, you just gotta just let your brain just take over. You don't think about anything. You just, you're drawing and shooting. That's because everything happens so fast. That's what you got to do. And I think that kind of helps because again, what I say about muscle memory is you're reacting to the shot.
Right.
I shot a doe 2 years ago and it was actually, I had a kind of suffering from target panic a little bit before that, just kind of falling apart at the shot for a little bit. And this actually really helped because I had to, and all it was I had to kind of scooch get under a branch and shoot. So I was more concerned about getting under that branch and I just drew back, shoot. And it was, double lunged him right behind the shoulder, buried in the opposite shoulder. And, she's quartering away. It was, I needed that shot at the time and it just kind of helped me. My mind kind of went blank. I just shot and that was it.
Yeah.
And then it kind of everything fell into place.
That kind of goes along with sort of the next pillar of what I call the code of traditional archery is that ethics to guide us along that journey. And that, like I talked to Brian Burkhardt a lot about this offline and both in podcasts, but I really identify with what Brian said. He said, I've decided not to draw on more deer than or animals than I've ever let the string down on.
Mm. Yeah.
What do you have to say about that? I'm interested in knowing, because I know with you, I've looked a little bit at the stuff that you've done and the organizations you've been sitting on as well, because you have kind of more of an ear to the ground for that kind of thing, right? I spoke to the big game committee here a couple of years ago and got laughed out the door, on that, because my point was let me frame this real quick. So hold that thought. My whole thing was, I'm not against crossbows. Don't bring me in here as a stick bow hunter and to slam crossbows. At least provide some training go along with the crossbows if you're going to give them 3 months to hunt in the archery season.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these guys are good gun hunters. They do deer drives. They know where bullet placement is. But I can put a bullet almost 360 on a deer in most cases, except the rear end, with a rifle, especially with the skill set I've been trained in, apart from other, professionally, as you're aware of. And it's not for me with a bow. You have to be really careful. Like, where is that arrow going to exit versus where it enters? Things like that. And they're like, what you're not getting, Grant, is that that isn't what sells. Success sells. And we can have a guy walk into Cabela's and grab a crossbow and hunt with it the next day. I'm like, you're not hearing me out here. Anyway,
Yeah. That's, that goes to, again, with the, and I think it's more so with a stick bow than anything else is, say there was an animal that you did want to take, you really have to wait for that perfect shot, you got to wait for it to, turn a certain way, step forward and everything else. And if it, I mean, I had about, I don't know. He was probably about 135 inch buck. I had him at 25 yards, and I wouldn't take that shot at 25 yards. I watched him. I had him broadside, but it's just, I'm not that, I wasn't that comfortable 25 yards. It's just me. And long story short, you brought up crossbows. That buck ended up getting, from what I was hunting my kid's property, and it was taken with a crossbow at 70 yards.
Right.
So I was like, I don't know. I'd almost rather see you get by a car, but but as far as like what you were saying is letting, you just not letting the string go on more animals than anything else. That's, for me, that's part of it. The observation, I think with trapping makes you a better, I think trappers make better hunters.
Sure.
I think traditional bow hunters make better bow hunters because you have to take it that next step. You're noticing more, you're seeing more. You have to get closer. Just like with trapping, how trapping makes you're seeing more sign.
Right.
You're seeing little subtle trails where the seta, and then that in turn helps with the hunting. So that's kind of I'm hoping I answered that part of your question pretty good.
Yeah, well, like we talked about before we started recording, ethics is a very individual thing. Essentially, it's not. It's based on experience and exposure and all these other things. I love reading Dennis Kamstra's old experiences when he used to write about hunting in Africa and how he set up things there, because you're looking at a different level, with that. Which is something I've never done.
Yeah. It's just like I said, it's hard to explain to somebody. And again, just like this past summer, I hunted South Africa. I was with a friend of mine from high school. We went. And it was just the four of us. There was 3 rifle hunters, and I had my recurve.
Right.
And, anybody who's hunted Africa, there's a price tag on each animal. And for me, most of the animals that I had shots at were a lot out of my price range.
Right.
And,
right.
But it's funny because Brian was, kind of razzing me a little bit because I posted a picture of a zebra. And I just didn't feel comfortable with the shot. I didn't take the shot, and part of me wanted to take a zebra, but then part of me really didn't want to take a zebra. So it's kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know how I felt about it. And then, he shot me a message with a picture of the one he had taken and, stuff like that. But it's, I don't think a lot of people and traditional bow hunters, I think in terms are easier to pass up opportunities like that than others. Again, because most of it's not necessarily, about the kill. It's, more so the experience, seeing there, setting it up. I mean, when it all comes together, it's great. It's the, and it's funny because again, I don't want to, but I was thinking about, I wanted to, like in 2019, I wrote a little article for the PBS magazine. I pretty much hunted, 3 of the 4 corners of the U.S. I hunted, I moose hunted in Alaska that year. I hunted bears in New Brunswick and, hogs in Florida. And it was, I I came back from all three of those places, empty handed. But it
Right.
wasn't, I did have I had a moose at 12 yards in Alaska, but non-residents, had a size limit. So I couldn't,
Right.
I couldn't release on it, but 12 yards, I could smell them. I could smell that musky smell.
Right.
It was an experience. That, as far as I was concerned, that was as good as, I don't have his antlers. I didn't have his meat to take home, and, moose meat's probably some of my favorite.
Yeah.
And, but I had that memory. I had that experience. New Brunswick bear hunt, probably one of the biggest black bears I've seen. I had come, he walked directly underneath me.
Yep.
And he walked out. It was a big boar that came in. I had a sow and two cubs about maybe 20 minutes before he came in.
Yeah.
But he just was directly facing away from me the entire time until he got to about 40 yards, and when he finally turned and walked off.
Sure.
So he never offered me a shot. Now, could I have done something stupid like taking a straight down shot, while he's facing away? Yeah, I could have done that, but more than likely I would have wounded him, but I was fine with that because I saw that big bear. I saw him up close, and, it's just a certain mindset.
Well, that leads into the final one, really, which is the conservation and stewardship. I know they all tie together a little bit, and we've kind of probably covered that off a little already. I think for me, like, in order to actually become intimate with that game animal, I talk about process a lot. In fact, the next book, The Ethical Predator, it's called The Path to Mindful Bowhunting. And I know that may sound cheesy and ethereal and kind of spiritual to people, but I think it's not. It's something like the inevitable in the first book talks about me losing a deer. I lost a deer. I went back to my truck to grab my tracking kit. I went out to not even really, I wasn't even really going to hunt that night. I was going to go out and do a little scout hunt, put my tree stand. I decided, like, wow, there's a lot of scrapes over here. There's a lot of action. I'm going to get up and sit there tonight. And I didn't, I was younger when I framed that animal. It had started raining. I got rained right out on it almost. And the coyotes gone on it. But I wanted so badly to find out what had happened. I just needed to know. I saw where the arrow went. I'm like, oh my God. And I found out where they got on him. It was not where I thought it had gone. Like, he turned in a different direction and to cut across an open field, obviously get away from them. I think my point I'm trying to make, though, is that I needed to know, I couldn't be like, oh, there's more deer. That would probably, in Ontario at that time, probably be the only buck I'd see the whole year.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was like, well, I need to know. And a farmer found him. I didn't. A farmer found him and said, hey, Grant, I know where he is. I found him. Come on out here. And, they probably gotten him they probably had when I heard them barking, I was going back to get my tracking kit. They were already on top of him at that point. My point was, like, when I went back and looked, you start kind of self-assessing. And I wish I knew the terrain a little better in there. It's the first time I'd been in that one end of that swamp. It was tough, and I helped a guy out a few years ago here who transitioned from a compound, and he shot a deer one night. He called me and he was completely in a panic. He spent the summer with me getting ready. He said, I hit it, but it's just gone. It took off and it ran and ran and ran, and I said, I just want you to remember something. The area though, it didn't go there. It didn't go there. So it's got to be somewhere here, without getting into too much detail right now.
Yeah.
But it's sort of that intimacy that connects with that conservation and stewardship. It goes hand in hand with the whole process. And I'd like to get your take on, how you feel about that. And if you've, hunting 4 different areas in North America, you kind of have to know where you're at on the ground from a bird's eye somewhat, correct? And what that environment's like.
Yeah. I mean, it helps. A lot of times, I think anybody who hunts a place the first time is at a little bit of disadvantage.
Right.
Sometimes it takes a while. Like I had and kind of a prime example. I had a spot I hunted for, 15 years.
Yeah.
Really good spot. It was open hardwoods. A ton of white oak trees, and, and so I really had to it wasn't a lot of cover, so I really had to concentrate on the terrain. Just
Right.
just kind of watch the funnels, how just a little 2-foot rise, how even that changed, where the deer were going. So it took me a while to figure that out. And then what happened? We got
Sure.
hit with Hurricane Sandy. Hurricane
Oh,
Sandy,
right.
holy, just wow! It just it changed that set of woods. I mean, I guess there was it was a pretty rocky area because I mean these big oak trees didn't have a lot of deep roots in them, and they all
Sure.
came down. So that was just
Wow.
changed. And my one spot that I had figured out, and it was just one tree. I killed a couple of pretty decent bucks out of. Oh man, it kind of got corralled in by a bunch of by a
Sure.
bunch of trees come down. So
Yeah.
it took me a little bit to relearn what was, because even the deer have to relearn the different
Sure.
routes around and easiest, and stuff like that. So, but getting back, I think anybody the first time they hunt a property, they're at a disadvantage the first time if they don't spend a lot of time there.
Yeah.
But if they do a lot of time scouting, and whether it's for deer, whether it's for turkeys, I mean, turkey, I do a lot of turkey hunting, and it's the same thing. You really got to, know where creeks are, stone walls, and things like that, or
Yeah.
else a lot of times you can just sit call. Bird will be gobbling like crazy because he wants you to come over to him.
That's right.
And just not knowing that this might be there, it could have saved yourself a lot of time and aggravation. And
Turkeys have become my number one thing in the last. I've hunted for over 20 years here, but in the last 10 years, I got a big love-hate affair with those birds.
Yeah, there are a lot of there, especially with the bow. And I've got a blind I can set up pretty quick.
Yeah.
And so I try to, I'll run and gun for a bit with it. So if I do get one, and I'll set up.
Sure.
And for me, with turkeys, it's decoys are pretty key because that kind of diverts their attention a little bit.
Sure. Yeah.
And stops them, slows them down. But I did get, here's kind of just a funny, and again, it's not really knowing the terrain.
Yeah.
I was out and I got a little cocky, kind of say. I didn't have a ghillie suit, but I had a leafy wear suit, and I was turkey hunting, and I had this spot where it was I set up, or I was kind of calling as I was going, and I was kind of in an open area. I wasn't hearing anything gobble, and all of a sudden, I just had a bird gobble really close. I mean, he had heard me, and he was
Sure.
coming in.
Yeah.
And he just decided to put a beat on me and gobbled.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of stuck in the middle of nowhere. So I dropped down, and it was a big maple tree I got behind, try to use that as a blind. And he was coming in like he was on a string. I mean, the way he was coming in, I was going to get probably about a 12-yard shot at him.
Yeah.
And he did me one even better. Instead of coming quarter, he actually stopped. He turned and was walking, perpendicular to me. And I mean, totally broadside. But as soon as I put tension on that string, he was up a tree.
Right.
He was
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was,
Yeah.
but again, it was an exciting hunt. But that was, again, not me really knowing that, that big open spot was there,
Right.
kind of being, stuck out. And
Yeah.
if I had to do over again, I would have done it a little different.
That's fantastic. I love hearing turkey stick bow stories because a lot of people are just. We used to have to go to check stations here in Ontario when the season first opened. The first one I took, I go through this check station, and there was like a crowd after about 15 minutes. What do you mean you shot it with that thing? I had an 85, 86 Damon Howlett Mamba, and they were staring at it, and they're looking at the turkey. And then they're staring at it and look at the turkey. They stare at it, look at the turkey.
And it's funny because I talked about I had a little bout with with target panic for a while.
Yeah.
And I found it's going to sound strange to people, but if you really think about it, I had a hard time with big game with it for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Turkeys, I had no problem.
You know what I believe, and I swear to God, I have where I sit up. We have a really dense swamp, and this has to go with that stewardship part. so your shot exposure, you've got maybe a 2 to 3 second shot window, even in that with the deer. And I had it last Sunday. I had a really nice 6-point come in and came in, and then something, he smelled me for sure, but he didn't know where I was. But instead of keeping down the trail, he cut to the secondary and he stopped 20 paces away behind this buckthorn tree, which I may add is no longer with us. The buckthorn tree has been since cut down. But that being said, it's funny because like it's just I find when I have a shorter shot exposure and time, it's like it really comes together like crazy. It's almost like when I have all that time and luxury, I'm like, oh my God, let's go. You kind of have to focus so much harder.
Well, I think with that, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying a little bit with that, with that doe that I shot. It's you just let muscle memory, everything else take over. You're not thinking about the shot, you just do it. Whereas if you're thinking too long, and I think that goes along with when you have too much time to think, you put too much pressure on yourself.
Right. Yeah.
And I think I think that's why with as far as with the turkeys, I wasn't putting the pressure on myself as I had with bears and deer and stuff like that.
Sure.
And I'll even kind of go back, and it's, listen, everybody has bad hits and things like that. And I had a string of and it was boggling my mind because they were seeing like decent hits, but I was just, for some reason, there was a couple of bears that we just, I had one, it was behind the shoulder. I passed through, couldn't find them. And this stuff starts playing in my head. I had another one. Mm-hmm. And this one was, I couldn't figure this out. He could, and again, I've hunted bears for 30 years and it's still, because they're a black blob, it's hard to,
sure.
He was quartering away, and and again, the shot, I sunk it right to the fletching. I was shooting, Douglas firs. The arrow snapped at the cresting. So 29 inch arrow, 29 and a half inch arrows, I had, I had 20, probably 23, 22 inches in them.
Yep.
And, quartering away. But the only thing I could figure with that was that he was really more of a harder quarter than I thought he was.
Right. Right.
And either I one-lunged him or I just kind of in between the ribs and the skin. That's the only other thing I can think of. But, so all that stuff started to play in my mind. And then, but come turkey season, I wasn't putting the pressure on myself. So it was, the shots were just, here they are, and I don't know. So I've learned just to kind of relax a little bit and not to put pressure on myself that, I was, that I had been doing, and it's just, even guys that have been doing it a long time, it happens,
Yeah. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it. I'm trying to get really those grassroots bow hunters, kind of voice out there a little bit more, and all the background and experience you've had. I appreciate you taking the time to come on. Our new direction we're moving in for the next 10 episodes. It means a lot, especially in the middle of deer season right now. So just to finish up, is your rut going pretty strong right now, or is it?
Yeah, our rut's going. The only problem, I haven't been out since probably I've only had 5 sits this whole season. I just have a lot going on right now.
Yeah, I'm tracking that. I get it.
Yeah, and it's this season I'm just kind of taking it easy as taking it with stride. I get out when I can, and again, not to put that pressure on myself.
Yeah.
And also next year I'm going to plan my year out a little bit better where I can plan my vacation, because I don't have much vacation time left.
Right.
Matter of fact, I plan on just kind of getting away and driving out to Illinois, but the transmission on my pickup went.
No, my God.
So I was going to drive out there, so that didn't, plus the cost of it. But so it's I'm kind of putting this season just a little bit, just and I'm okay with it because I'm watching my friends knock them down.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's awesome. I mean, you know, a lot of my friends are killing, and I run the Facebook page for PBS.
Right
So every
on.
time I see, I'll post something. If they don't post, I'll post it for them. You know,
My youngest always is be like, I'll go out and she'd be like, did you get a Burkhardt Hall pass? I'm like, they've been revoked this year, dear. I don't have enough time. So she's on top of that. She wants to make a t-shirt with it.
yeah,
So
that is pretty funny. You know, he's got that leash in Ohio, and I
yes.
just him and Don Dave. I don't know if you're familiar with Don Davis. His PBS member from Florida. Really, he's another hardcore,
Yeah.
you know, really ethical bow hunter. And they were calling me Quick Draw just because for some reason they'll post something, I'll like hit a like within a minute or
Sure.
something.
Yeah. That's
They were
awesome.
kind of, you know, joking with me about it. Well, it was kind of a good thing in a way, but I didn't have the money to do it anyway. But he had a spot on his lease not in Ohio.
Oh.
I was the first one. It was mine because I was the first one, and I
Sure.
was like, I don't
Oh
know.
man.
And I kind of passed on it, which I'm kicking myself, but you know, is what it is.
That's so funny.
Well,
thanks so much for coming on, sharing your thoughts. Appreciate it, Sean.
I appreciate you having me.
Thanks. Appreciate all the support too. It means a lot.
Okay.
We're standing alone here in Canada some days, I think.
Yeah, it seems, you know, like you said, Canada. I kind of have a soft spot for Canada because it's I've hunted fished Canada a lot, and I've done very well there. You know, between you know, bears, deer, geese, you know, fishing, northerns. Yeah, it's a good place.
Right on. Thanks,
right.
man.
Thank
Cheers.
you. Bye.
Good luck to everyone out there chasing spring black bear or wild turkeys. We wish you all the best of luck in the woods. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate all the positive feedback we've been getting from folks all over the world. Please do take the time to leave a rating and comment. Our message is based on the 3 pillars of the Code of Traditional Archery, with the ethical predator mindset, weapon proficiency with the stick bow, ethics to guide us on our collective journey, and conservation with stewardship in order to protect the wildlife, woods, fields, and waterways we hunt, as our themes are resonating. We are the ethical predator, a hunter who adheres to a set of ethical guidelines and principles when pursuing game with a traditional bow or other primitive weapons platform. We're building a movement, a community of like-minded people who celebrate the Code of Traditional Archery worldwide. Our dream? Connecting everyone that loves traditional bow hunting and inspiring people through the sport we love to carry on the legacy of traditional bow hunting. The first 1,000 members get lifetime free access. Once we hit 1,000, it'll become paid membership only. Secure your spot now. Join the ultimate traditional bow hunting community and get like-minded hunters who will collaborate that all shoot traditional, expert tracking and scouting strategies used by stick bow hunters for centuries, global connections with traditional bow hunting enthusiasts, and exclusive training tips to elevate your game, contest giveaways, and members-only perks. Gain exclusive access to resources and vote on traditional bow hunting merchandise only available to members. The clock is ticking. Get your free lifetime access now. Join and be a part of the movement of traditional bow hunting and support the heritage of hunting the hard way with your own contributions. The link is in the comments. Thanks for listening in. We encourage you to immerse yourself in the art of the stick bow. Shoot straight and walk the path of the ethical predator.